2007 was kind of unfair, I mean, with how many good movies were out there.
Yeah, I mean, like, you had There'll Be Blood, No Country for Old Men, Assassination of Jesse James. As much as you can feel bad for Zodiac, you know, it didn't really have a chance.
Like, it was a good year.
Good year for murder. A lot of those films.
Good year for murder. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the CineFix Top 100, the unsolved puzzle of 100 of the greatest movies ever made. We're trying to unravel before it kills again. I'm Clint Gage, and joining me, as per usual, San Francisco treat himself, Michael Calabro. Cal, what's going on, man?
Hey, Clint. How's it going, dude?
It's going. You enjoying your hiatus?
Yeah.
Yeah, not too much though. We're back here with a fun little in between the seasons episode here. And before we moved ahead to season 4 officially, we did want to do a couple other episodes with some folks that are important parts of CineFix that don't get seen quite so much on this channel. So to get us going on that front is our pal from across the pond at IGN UK. He's the guy that got My Best Shots up and going, which is the show we've all been having a lot of fun with. Simon Cardy. Hi, man. Super glad you're here.
Hello. I didn't realize I was the first of the non-trade to come on. What an honor.
Yep.
And, you know, I've picked a really just fun, easy breezy film to get us going as well.
It's meant to be an honor, so I'm glad you're aware of that. I wanted to make sure that to get you on the show, and in the spirit of Top 100, I was like, well, what's a movie that would be in your top? You know, I don't know. And before I could finish that sentence, you were like, I did 250 of them. So
yeah, I have a Letterboxd list that I've been updating for years and years, which is just my top 250 films of all time, which is an impossible task, but we've got one of them today.
I mean, everybody's already clicked on it. I love making a big deal out of revealing the title of the movie that we're about to talk about, as though people are coming into this fresh. But we're going to talk about Zodiac. High on your list. We'll talk about exactly where it's on your list by the end of the episode. But Zodiac from 2007. David Fincher, Robert Downey Jr., Mark Ruffalo, Jake Gyllenhaal, and a supporting cast of... This is one of my favorite types of movies, is movies that have, like, just bursting at the seams with, oh, yeah, that guy. Like, everybody, even Goose, Anthony Edwards is in this movie. But it's based on the book by Robert Graysmith, who is portrayed by Gyllenhaal, about his experience with both the official investigation and his amateur investigation that he conducted on his own after the one ended into the Zodiac killer, the very real, very unsolved case of the Zodiac killer. So, Cardy, this is your pick. I want to start with you. Who is the Zodiac killer?
Straight in with that. I don't know if we know.
Let's lead with the easy one.
Yeah. I think Fincher thinks he knows, but I don't know if he does. But yeah, that's
who's your
money on? But there's one paradox in that movie that we'll get to, that famous scene, and makes me question its confidence. You know?
Yeah. I haven't done extensive research on the case. I won't lie. I am not David Fincher, but you know, signs do point to it being who he thinks it is. But you know, this is like one of my favorite types of films, right, where it's a conspiracy thriller based on real information, but the director has an opinion and they're rolling with it. It's like JFK for me. I love JFK. I find it ridiculously entertaining. Is it correct? Probably absolutely not. But it's very fun to watch.
Dude, you hit the nail on the head. Like this scratched like the perfect itch. I was telling you earlier, I'm reading Don DeLillo's Libra right now, which is the fictional account of Lee Harvey Oswald's JFK assassination. That got me going down the rabbit hole of the JFK assassination. And like, this is just like that, where there's just fuzzy facts that no one completely knows, and it's so entertaining. Like, I just, weirdly enough, this movie really clicked for me in the second half of it when Robert Graysmith starts to do his investigation, and then like that's like when I was in. But we'll talk more about that. I'm a big fan of this movie.
I was a bigger fan of the front half of the movie, but to your point, Cardy, about it being, you know, it's not historical fiction and it's not a documentary, but it's based on fact, but with a lot of opinion and a lot of like kind of infused into the business. Which everything that I read about the movie and about how Fincher approached it, like they wanted it to be very clean and very dry, and like the approach they took was very just truthful and like let's let the script do the talking. Which is strange because it's also a visually just gorgeous film to look at. which there's a lot to talk about there as well. But one of the things I love about this too is which, like, I think one of my favorite parts about it is we're walking through this movie with Gyllenhaal's character with Graysmith as our way into it, and we keep running into these roadblocks about like the process involved. This is such a process focused movie as well, and like seeing the frustration of just a regular dude being like, I want to see this thing solved and I want this to be helpful, and he just keeps running into these roadblocks and he can't really actually make it happen, and nobody professionally in a bureaucratic sense can actually get it done or figure it out. And so like and watching that drive a person insane is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's maybe odd, and I may sound like a weirdo for saying this. This is a real like comfort film for me. Like I watched this.
That is odd. You do sound like a weirdo.
I watched this like at least once.
Your instincts are correct on that.
I don't know if it's because it is like you said. It's so procedural. It's just so. It's like ticking off the boxes as you go, but it's just so like it's 2.5 hours. But for me, it just absolutely flies by. I don't know if that's because it is so snappy. The editing, the dialogue is all just so snappy. But it's also like weirdly dreamlike. It kind of washes over you. It's like, to me, like the few times I saw it, I hadn't been to San Francisco and I wasn't around in the 60s and 70s, and it felt so far away. It always felt dreamlike to me. But like, I've been to San Francisco a few times since, and like, I've been to like, the Chronicle building and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh, this is all. Suddenly it all brings.
Did you take the Zodiac tour when you went?
It's actually only like a few blocks away from the old IGN office and stuff, and I was just like, I walked down there one day and I was like, oh, this is all very real, and you kind of forget, like, the film makes it seem so like dreamlike and glossy in a way, but so not glossy at times, and just it was only 50 years ago and not that far away.
Yeah. Well, and even there's a lot of things that the movie does that it trades in that, like, here's what an audience expects the 60s to look like. Kind of visuals, so like, and I did read some stuff because the other thing that we do here at Top 100 is we religiously look for American cinematographer interviews about the movies. Love me some American cinematographer interviews. Listening to Harris Savides, reading about what he sort of did to the look of the film, and that was part of the deal. Is like, it needs to feel like what we think the 60s look like as an audience in the 2000s, which is a level of thoughtfulness that I think comes through, and I think any good movie needs to have that to some degree. So this is David Fincher in '07, like this 15-year run of David Fincher I'm fascinated by, starting with Seven in '95, Game in '97, Fight Club in '99, Panic Room in '02, which I'll happily defend, but I'll also admit it's kind of the low point of this particular run, which is really saying something because I think it's a good movie. But then Zodiac in '07, Benjamin Button in '08, Social Network in 2010. That's 15 years.
I think Benjamin Button is kind of the low point of more than.
It's still watchable though. It's still perfect.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't know that I've ever gone back to it.
No,
so,
I
I
haven't.
think I've watched it at home. But anyway, point is, like, that's a hell of a 15-year run.
Don't forget, he's got like Social Network coming up after this too. Like,
the other fascinating thing mixed into all of that are a bunch of commercials and music videos. Like, he was constantly working on commercials and music videos the whole time.
So like, my hot take on this movie is I think that if like Seven is his Goodfellas, this is his Casino. And this is maybe the one instance where I'm a bigger fan of this Casino than Goodfellas.
This is my favorite Fincher film. I think this is his masterpiece. I think it brings together everything you kind of know him for: the darkness, the obsession, the precision of everything, and it's kind of like the merging the things you associate with him, which in the 70s, like the merging of pop culture and like, violence on television, like merging in America. And, I'm obviously, you can probably tell, not American, but, as far as I've read and listened, like this was like the real first case like this to blow up. And it was obviously in that like Summer of Love with the Manson stuff going on as well. And it's like, you can tell like this to me is just Fincher, like completely in his bag, and like just being ahead of the curve as well. Like, true crime wasn't as massive as it would be in the years that followed. Like Serial and Netflix would kind of lean into that in the years to come.
Dateline's been around forever, but they only started making fun of it on Saturday Night Live. Recently.
But like, I think he's like underrated for doing being prescient about these things. Like, Social Network obviously was, everyone could kind of see maybe social media and Zuckerberg weren't the best thing in the world, but that's kind of come true more than we could have believed. And, you know, Benjamin Button, you know, old men are being born all the time these days. So, you know, he's kind of...
He's way ahead of that.
I know, he knows what he's doing.
I also think that this is probably his best movie, which explains, now that I think about it, the lack of Fincher on my list.
It's so easy to go to 7 because it's great. And like between 7 and Fight Club and that sort of aesthetic becoming really popular and kind of a go-to for a certain type of film for a long time after, it's hard not to point at that and be like, there's the cultural impact of David Fincher. But like, no, I do think that the idea of any filmmaker's best work being the thing that combines all the things they're good at, like that's a really good point, I think, about Zodiac. It's a really good vote for Zodiac being his best thing.
I mean, Fincher clones were a thing for a moment, right? Like, I don't think that like that is I think that's a slogan that you and I have been tossing around, but like there are so many good movies that are just straight up Fincher clones. Like I think of that 1997 Denzel Washington John Goodman movie Fallen, which Smile just like completely ripped off. And then Jang Bong-ho's like Memories of a Murder, right? Like if that's not a Fincher clone, then I don't know what is.
Well, they kind of influence each other. Like Memories of Murder is also one of my absolute favorite films of all time. And
it's incredible. But like it definitely is like, you know, like it's swimming in the wake of like the style and vibe of Seven, just like Boogie Nights takes a lot from Goodfellas, you know, which isn't, they're not bad. The movie's not worse for doing it. It's just they're all incredible.
Every year that goes by, right? Zodiac, I feel like gains more and more people are like, oh, maybe this is a forgotten masterpiece. You know, I don't think it's necessarily the film sort. Like, I don't know if you want to go through, like 2007 was just insane. Like, you know, it didn't really have a chance at the Oscars when you look at that list.
Yeah, well, you know, in box office wise, it didn't do a ton either.
No.
Like it made like 80 something million worldwide on a budget of 60 something. So it wasn't like it was you know, it did well enough, but it wasn't like it was setting the world on fire. So I do think it is a movie that's the legacy has sort of outweighed what it did, you know, after the jump. But because it is another one of those movies that I don't think that I necessarily went back to it often. Like I saw it in theaters when it came out. I ran into it over the years doing whatever projects for CineFix, and you know, it's shown up on a couple of movie lists here and there. So like I've kind of dipped my toe back into it. But this is like watching it now and really poring over it for this. Like this movie's good.
I knew it. Dan's the most dangerous animal of all. I knew that. I heard that from somewhere. The most dangerous game. It's a movie about a cat who hunts people for sport. People. The most dangerous game.
Who's that?
That's Count Zaroff.
Zaroff? With a Z?
It's hard to have done this movie well. It's just so much talking and just like reading and conversations. And like, there's like what? 2 actual on-camera murders and then 1 attempted. And that's not even really done on camera. It's just like, it's basically 2.5 hours of talking about 3 action sequences. It's an incredible feat that also spans decades.
Quietly terrifying, which is hard to pull off.
It's basically a horror film.
Yeah. But I mean, we mentioned that it not sort of getting, you know, what happened in 2007 because it didn't win an award at all. It was nominated for a handful of things. Fincher got one in Dublin or something like that. So like regionally, it got nominations and a couple of little things here or there. But in terms of major awards, it got nothing. Not even nominations. But it's partly because 2007. We were talking about this before we went, but 2007 was kind of unfair. In a way, with how many good movies were out there.
Yeah, I mean, like you had There'll Be Blood, No Country for Old Men, Assassination of Jesse James, Michael Clayton, Free Sense of Humor, Hot Fuzz, even, you know, like Superbad, I'll always have a place in my heart for, like, you know, it's incredible. Sure. In a film year where, you know, for a long time, There'll Be Blood was my favorite film of all time, but that's kind of shifted recently. But like, yeah, in a year where that doesn't win the Oscar and you've got No Country for Old Men waiting to steal it, I mean, yeah, I feel as much as you can feel bad for Zodiac, you know, it didn't really have a chance.
The fact that it's in conversation with those I do think that like No Country for Old Men and There'll Be Blood are like S tier movies of the century, And the fact that like even the A tier movies from that year, which is just like Clayton, Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, and this, it's just insane. Even Gone Baby Gone, like what a year. There's more than
you got Cronenberg doing his non body horror stuff. Like he had Eastern Promises that year. Like it was a good year.
Good year for murder. A lot of those films.
Good year for murder and violence.
Don't forget, and I mean, like even like the lower hanging fruit. Like if you told me like, hey, let's make a teen focused remake of Rear Window starring Shia LaBeouf, like
He's
2007 is the time to do it, man.
Yeah. Like Disturbia is better than it had any right to be.
Right.
This is like a lot of my favorite like subgenres of films as well coming together. Like Mark Ruffalo getting really frustrated while investigating things like this, Shutter Island, Spotlight. Like I love when he's just looking confused, going like, "What's going on?" the whole time. Like he's so good at that, and it's kind of I just genuinely do think he's one of the best actors in the world, and people don't say it enough.
Yeah.
But
And he was decently established at that point too, because like I mean, You Can Count on Me, Eternal Sunshine, like I know 13 Going on 30 is right there in his oeuvre. But those are all before Zodiac, and so like, but like I do love the idea that Zodiac is sort of the birthplace of his like angry investigator persona. Like that's a good flag.
All right, and this is like just before him and Downey Jr. gets swallowed up by the MCU as well, isn't it? This is basically the year before Iron Man, I think. So
yeah, it's immediate, and it was one thing that I was struck by rewatching it now. Like his character in this movie is proto Tony Stark. Like it's the same. He even has the same facial hair. So it's wild, kind of watching it now. Almost 20 years later. Thinking like, oh, he was Iron Man the next year. Ruffalo, he didn't take over for the Hulk until I guess it was 2012, 2013 or something like that. But because he was recast for the Avengers. But yeah, the proto Tony Stark action that Paul Avery has in this movie is really kind of interesting. It makes the casting choice seem less risky than the old story would have you believe. Everybody's like, oh, we didn't know Downey Jr. It's like, yeah, you did. He did it in Zodiac. He's great.
I think Gyllenhaal's amazing as well. I know he's the one. If there's any part in it, people are always a bit like, oh, is he quite right for it? But I think he's great. He's good at doing that sort of like twitchy sort of manic thing. And like, again, another favorite subgenre of mine is Jake Gyllenhaal trying to solve code-related crimes. Like Prisoners is another one of my absolute favorite films, and
Prisoners is incredible. I'm starting to get a feel for who you are as movies.
Exactly. Well, I absolutely love Nightcrawler as well, and that's almost like a 21st it's almost like a 21st century evolution of the Graysmith character, like what he would be if he was around now. If there was no if the death of print media, he would absolutely be chasing ambulances around.
I made the exact same note.
And a little more of a psychopath.
So good in Nightcrawler. Yeah, like it doesn't take much of a nudge. If the section of Graysmith that is like 2/3 of the way through this movie, where his wife comes and she's like, you can't let the kids see me like this, like that. If that becomes permanent Graysmith, it becomes Nightcrawler.
Like you said, the supporting cast is ridiculous. Like when you can afford to just have Philip Baker Hall for 4 minutes of your film, you're doing good. It's just so good.
The thing that I wrote in my note is like, your movie's good if you have Philip Baker Hall in it for this small amount of time. Like that's another Boogie Nights thing. It's like, you're doing good if you can get Philip Baker Hall to show up for 15 minutes.
And weirdly, he was in the film called The Zodiac, which came out 2 years previously, which was a horror film based on...
Did he play the same guy?
I don't think he did. No, I don't actually know who maybe he was the Zodiac. That would have been interesting. But I can't say I have seen the Zodiac.
Shall we get into brilliant moments?
Oh, there's a few.
There's a few. I wager you've got a handful. So let's go ahead and start chipping away at your list. What do you want to talk about first, man?
The very opening scene. And we're not going to do the whole film, I promise. But the way it sets up, like we said, that sort of almost like dreamlike image of what you imagine the late 60s was in California, and then just kind of shatters it with that murder. And like, it almost sets up the film. It almost weirdly reminds me of the opening of Scream. It like sets up like a horror film, like, oh, this is maybe going to be like, the teenagers are getting chased by a killer, and that does ultimately happen. And he kind of sets the scene in that way.
It sets up that false sense of security of suburban.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just like, this is just like every street America. Nothing to see here. Like, Blue Velvet does that shit too. You know, like, where it's just like, here is like your idealized take of like what an American suburb looks like is supposed to look like, just to be completely subverted in like mere moments. It's excellent.
Yeah, and just like the cut, the tone, I just love. They sound weirdly sort of dreamy about that, and like you often see like dreamy stuff is like white and like clouds and like a bit more like oversaturated, but this is almost like very sleepy in its tone. It's almost like trying to, like you said, lull you in, and then the murder happens. Then it plays Hurdy Gurdy Man, the song, which is one of, I don't think I'd heard it before this film. It's one of the creepiest. I don't know if it's just because I associate it with this film in my head now, but it is a really creepy song.
Yeah, it's got a vibe to it for sure.
This is like one of the earlier movies that's shot on video as opposed to film.
Yeah, this was one of the first major ones to go all digital.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting about this, and Clint, I know you know a lot more about this than I do, but correct me if I'm wrong. But like one of the interesting things of like discrepancies between film and video is like film is really good in highlight situations and gets a lot of detail and brights, but video is really, really good at preserving detail and blacks. And this scene in particular is like really well done with how like minimal lighting there is. It really leans into the detail and texture of the blacks and the dark shades in this to really, really set the tone. And it's just like lights in this are just like spotlights, and they're harsh and they're abrasive, and you can't see anything because
they're practical source driven, right? Like, and this is a thing, and it's a challenge because you see, and there's this is where wide shots become very important, on weird like outweighed importance of wide shots and shooting digital and low light and things like that, is because you need to establish where this light's coming from. Because like a car pulls up and its headlights are shining, so you know where that is. But for the rest of the scene, you know, we're lighting them based on, there's one light on top of a work pole on the other side of the parking lot or whatever. And so that becomes the source of literally everything. Like, you can't do anything that's not coming from that source in the world of the film, right? And so you have to make everything look believable based on that. And even like the way that this is shot with, you can't see their faces as well as the rest of them because, you know, the top of the car is cutting everything off. Like, it's so just sort of casual, honestly, in its presentation of like, this is what it feels like to be in a car out in the middle of, you know, out on Lover's Lane or whatever. And it looks so good, but like, you know, the detail that they get in it. And this is it's a weirdly fascinating moment in 2007 for production workflow, which is weird thing to say, but like, because they started to shoot everything on digital cameras, but they were still projecting everything on film. And so the way, you know, color correction technology and the way that they did digital intermediates and the way that they did the color timing process of movies, you know, they started doing digital intermediates before this, but they would scan the film and make it digital, do the color correction, print it back to film. But then now they didn't have film to scan anymore. And so there's like this 4 or 5 year window where they were shooting on digital but delivering largely on film, because, you know, digital projection kind of grew at around the same pace as shooting on digitally. This is in the weeds of post-production workflow, but the point is, like, the way that they had to light and shoot and account for this stuff, it took so much work to make this movie look natural.
And we're kind of seeing it now as well. I think 95% of it was shot digital, but I think I read that the actual slow motion murder scenes he did shoot on film to get that.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Look. Yeah, and
the high speed stuff, because that was a thing that digital it still doesn't do it quite right. You know, like high speed film is you know, this is the gray on my chin showing a little bit, but I do think high speed film is the best way to do like super slow mo, like what they're doing here. But you know, before we leave this scene, like stylistically, things going on in this scene, I love the perspective because this is, you know, it lives in these kids' perspective. Most of the camera is placed in the car for most of the scene. They're watching things happen around them. You know, it could have been easy to, even the sound effect of the brake squealing in the distance, like after the first time he leaves, like that's way off in the distance and they kind of hear it. So it roots you in the position of, you know, this Norman Rockwell kind of like carefree. We're going up to like, and I guess, is she cheating on her husband? Because he asks about her husband at some point. So she's just like getting some neighborhood kid to go fool around in her car while her husband's out of town or something. Which in itself is kind of like a little chipping away at some type of, idyllic past that didn't actually exist or something. But like, anyway, the point is, this is a scene that puts you in the perspective of the victims, and it makes you feel their fear. The scene is about their fear, regular people's fear. And so in that sense, like capturing the energy that was really around the Zodiac killer and the way that everybody was scared of it at the time, for this to be the opening scene, to sort of quietly focus on how scary it is for this killer to kind of, sneak up in a way, even though he's not sneaking at all. Like, that's the other fascinating thing. All of these victims just kind of like politely allow it to happen in a certain way. Like they're not like trying to run ever, which is not a thing we're used to in horror.
Whenever we're shown the Zodiac, like a murder like this, we're showing it very cleanly, we show it very calmly, the camera's still. Whenever we're on the other side of it with the investigation, which I'm sure we'll get to an example of later, it's much more frantic. There's some actual like handheld camera going on. It's kind of like showing almost the film from the very instant here puts the Zodiac killer in control of the film. It's like he is just in control of all these proceedings, and it kind of never really lets go of that through the whole runtime, I think. I
do love a movie that teaches you how to watch the rest of the movie with the opening scene. Like it, I think watching this, kind of what to expect for like, and I do, we'll talk about the more murders as we get there, but like the way that the murders happen also so close to the victims, like it's hard to watch. Like
absolutely,
when we get to the scene by the lake, the couple by the lake,
absolutely,
like that, there's a shot in that sequence that's just like, ugh.
Do we want to just talk about that one right now? Because I also think that there's an important discussion to be had about the contrast between how those two scenes are shot, because
we can do that.
Sure. I mean, listen, let's get the murders out of the way, all the way through.
I mean, they're all done within the first half an hour of the film. They're all done, essentially.
Yeah, they're all because like there's a quote from that American Cinematographer magazine that I want to bring up, and it says to that end, the action in Zodiac is presented objectively with the camera impassively documenting each scene. And I think it's really, really interesting that the way they do it in the first one, because they're still trying to keep like the shroud of mystery, so it's very, very tight on the victims and from the perspective of the car, and wide shots are used at a minimum in the first murder, but they are used at a premium in the on the lakeside killing in the daylight.
Yeah, there's a wide shot in that lakeside killing that we could spend the rest of this episode talking about for all.
If we're going to do my best shot, if we're going to pick a shot from this film, that would be in my top 3, I think, if it's the one I'm thinking of. But yeah, it's just like you said, it's almost like there is still mystery to the scene, obviously, because he's wearing the outfit, but like the stark difference, like I don't know if I've ever seen like a murder scene like this in another film, like just the open daylight, just there's no music, like it's almost completely stylistically opposite to the first one. And I don't know if that's Fincher almost saying like, this is how the Zodiac operated, there was no pattern, I'm not going to follow a pattern with how I show you these necessarily, apart from the perspective of the victims, essentially. And yeah, I think this is more of him saying, whereas the first one is like, I'm bringing you into a movie, this is going to be a ride. This one is 15 minutes in, I'm going to shock you. This is horrible. There is no music. There is little style. Like the feels weird to say this, but like the stabbing is kind of just like, you're just hearing it. You're kind of seeing, it's just, it's really shocking. Like it's just a real stark difference.
I think too, I think too, it's, and this is the wide shot I want to talk about. There is, as soon as the Zodiac, if it really is the Zodiac, I assume it's the Zodiac. I don't know. This is the other great part of the movie is like, there's no, they put, I think they cast 3 or 4 different actors, 3 or 4 different actors to play these different Zodiacs, so that, that threw you off the scent too. But there's this shot in the sequence. It's a wide shot. We're behind the couple, and they're 3/4 close to us. This shot is fascinating to me. It's easy to look at this and say this is a simple wide shot. It's doing so much work. Like, just compositionally, you've got soft focus, extreme foreground grass, just kind of poking up from the
By
bottom
the way,
of the frame.
that shit is fake. That shit is fake, by the way. That has been put in post.
Almost all the landscapes in this film are.
Whatever.
Apart from this one,
Like,
I think.
Yeah. Well, even some of the streets I read were actually blue screen because they couldn't shoot at some of the locations. And
I think
so
he
they
airlifted
they
these
made
trees in as well because they weren't growing there anymore.
Well, whatever, like, it makes it more of a design. And great,
Yeah.
that's fine with me because, like, it's a gorgeous composition because you've got that stuff in the foreground, you've got the deep background of the lake and the mountains in the distance. You've got the heels, the couple's heels are at the very bottom of the frame, and their backs are closer to the edge of frame than the Zodiac's is on the other side. But your eyes go to them first. Right, which is still important because we're in their perspective. So, like, I feel like they're the first part of this frame that I noticed. But then you start looking at the production design of it and how their wardrobe is more in line with the color of the ground. Zodiac's, he's blacked out and he almost matches the trees because the trees are dark and they're kind of weirdly reaching out for the couple. Like, this is a threatening, like, portrait of two people that are trapped, but also, like, it's there's a version of this where it's like this is all perfectly natural too because they match the ground, he matches the trees. This is just how life works, in a way. Like, this, it's such an unnerving shot. And again, for a digital camera at the front end, at the front edge of that movement, to be able to capture, like, the detailed blacks of the Zodiac's wardrobe with the not quite blown out white of the guy's shirt and the sky in the background, for all of that to work together on a format that they were still feeling out and working the kinks out of, is remarkable. And this shot is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible. And you kind of touched on it. Like, we do hear the Zodiac speak, and it's very, it's obviously deliberately not just used Carol Lynch's voice for this. And, like, do you think, I was wondering in my head, is that him, because this film to me makes it seem like David Fincher is very sure in his own mind that Arthur Lee Allen was the killer and he is the killer. Like, do you think he didn't use his voice the whole way through? Are you sure?
I disagree with that statement because it like, two things about that like, the more I think about it, we're going to talk a decent amount about the basement scene, and if Arthur Lee Allen is the killer, then that basement scene shouldn't have the insane amount of tension that it does provide. And to the point that you're also it's not using Arthur Lee Allen's voice here. It's like, I think that those are the breadcrumbs of acknowledging of, like, at least from the filmmaker's perspective, how muddy the evidence set is. Because it can't set its way out. Because if it was, like, that's the thing that, like, this time around when I was watching it, when I got to the basement scene, it's like, that to me is the scariest fucking scene in that movie.
Oh, absolutely.
But to your point, right? Like, if we're saying Fincher is sure, then why is that scene so insanely tense and frightening?
This is always part of the fun with these things. Is like, how much credit do you want to give the filmmaker, or how much are we just reading into stuff? But, like, I do think both things can be true, though. Like, if David Fincher is sure that Arthur Lee Allen is the Zodiac, like, that can be true. But also, the fascination around the Zodiac is that none of the evidence is conclusive. Things are different with each crime scene, and that part of the allure of this, and part of the point that he makes, because there's also a lot of, like, he goes out of his way. There's a scene later where time passes, 4 years pass or whatever, and it's all done over black with just, like, media clippings talking about other killings talking about it, and there's, like, a signal to noise ratio where everything just kind of gets lost as we float forward. So, like, part of this movie is also our fascination with this kind of thing, which is you touched on earlier. But, like, so I think, if you can't tell the story of the Zodiac without also being like, we just don't know. We just don't know. Like, I know, it's part of the fun of it too, right? And part of the allure of people being into true crime in general is like, oh, I know who killed that person. It's like, you don't.
It's why there's still Jack the Ripper tours every night in London.
Exactly.
When I leave the office,
Exactly.
I see a group of people. I'm like, You're never gonna know.
I feel like the story of the Zodiac and the story of true crime stuff in general, to some degree, is all about like, I have my theory that I 100% believe, but also everybody does, and
Absolutely.
they're all mildly different.
And to your point, Clint, I do think that like is the middle ground, right? Cardy, I do think you're right that David Fincher as an individual thinks that Lee did it, but his film, I think, leaves the door open for interpretation, and that's kind of what makes it so good.
What's the next murder? Which one we got?
The Washington and Cherry cab murder, I believe.
The cab murder.
Like they say in the film, it's like there is no pattern. It's almost like he's done this one to throw, and we don't really know, like, how many Zodiacs, if there's one Zodiac, if all of them were the same person, but like they are just all so different. Like the overhead shot following the cab is just so odd. I love it, but I'm just like, why this choice? I was
GTA shot?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
there's
GTA, isn't it?
yeah. The way it's tied, the movement is tied to the movement of the cab too, is unnatural. Like it's not a thing it's not a thing that's in our cinematic language, right?
By the way,
like
it predates drones too, right? This would have been before the drone shot became like a huge staple.
I will admit I haven't done my
the other
research, but I imagine it's mostly, if not all, CGI. But
it's got to be, right?
Yeah,
like, I mean, the cab probably is at minimum, right? Like, but that's the great thing about Fincher working in commercials. Quick aside is like innovation in production, like coming from commercial. Bullet Time came out of commercials because there is so much money in commercials. Like so much money gets thrown around to make 30 or 60 seconds of stuff that you have room to do all of that innovating and stuff like that. And so, and Fincher worked with his camera. He worked with the Viper very consciously on 3 commercials before he shot this, so that he could understand the workflow and all of that stuff. And so, like, anyway, all that to say that's my plug for the old commercial industry being where real innovation happens in the film industry.
This whole scene's about 3 or 4 shots long. Like you get the tracking of the cab, you get 2 shots inside the cab, and then you get this. This is maybe my favorite shot in the whole film. It's so simple, but it's just this pull out on the cab, and all you hear is the police call of the murder happening, and it's so. And you get is it Bang Bang? I think the song playing over it. It's just, again, like I think I mentioned that it's the smooth, like almost calm and clinical nature of the killings. Just like I think this scene just encapsulates it all, because then the next scene we get, I think after Dave Toschi wakes up, is them at the crime scene, and just the real stark difference between like Mark Ruffalo walking around that scene and it's following him handheld, and it's just the real like difference between Fincher. Not like you almost want to say it's not a respect, but it's almost like this Zodiac, the Zodiac guy was good at what he did, almost like it was clinical. It was like
there's a degree of chaos to the investigation that Zodiac doesn't have. Yeah,
describe him as a white male, glasses, crew cut, stocky, wearing a dark jacket.
Wait, I thought someone said he was black.
That's the description that went out to radio cars.
Yeah, we already corrected it.
Oh, well, that's good.
You guys need anything else?
No, get out of here.
Thanks. Happy birthday.
Wait, it's your birthday.
Yep.
That's great. Happy birthday.
Thanks. Body or scene?
It's your birthday. I'll take the body.
Cal, I don't think this was in the quote that you just read from that American Cinematographer's article, but here's my pull quote that I really liked. Part of the approach on Zodiac was to make it look mundane enough for people to accept that they were watching is the truth.
Yeah.
Which is like to calmly approach this stuff. And that's the thing that's really true with the killing, with the murder scenes, is, and the idea that people are just sort of like, hey man, you really kind of scared me, and then getting murdered. The idea that people don't see it coming, or that people aren't able to react, or people are just so trained to be polite in weird situations like that, but the approach of making it so mundane that we can't argue with the fact that this really happened is fascinating. But with this taxi cab murder, this overhead shot is anything but that, which is interesting, because the rest of this movie is so tied to perspective, and it's so insistent on putting us in certain the victim's shoes for the most part, particularly in these scenes, that this is such a strange choice. And to be honest, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I don't know that it just visually it looks cool and it looks weird, and it's an opportunity to sort of listen to the call-in show and people's reaction to it. It's also the first one that takes place in the city, right? Like this is when he comes to the city, so there might be something to floating through the city and hearing people react to it. It's like, well, it's out in the sticks, and I'm not worried about people, getting killed here. And then immediately we see somebody get killed. So this one might be more about the city than it is about the cabbie.
So I was going to say, he wants to make it more about the setting and more about what they're listening to. He wants you to focus on what's being said on that radio, I think, rather than like as soon as you put the camera in the cab, you're going to be looking around, you're going to be looking at the people, you're going to be trying look in the back seat, see if you can tell who it is, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't let you in the car until it's too late, essentially, and you don't get to know this victim at all. Like it's just almost like. It's almost like we said, all these murders come in quick succession, like within the first half an hour. It's almost like, and it's another one. It's almost like Fincher going, this is getting out of hand and no one's doing anything about it. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the next scene we see is the police seemingly finally getting involved in this to any great extent. Like before that, it is mainly just some journalists going, oh, we're getting these notes. What is going on here?
That scene, like the follow-up, the investigation, has some of the best dialogue in the movie. Ruffalo and Anthony Edwards are like going back and forth. It's like you put
the animal crackers.
Yeah. And like the animal crackers thing. That is like so good of them just like trying to reenact the crime. It's like it's so eminently cinematic, and it has just like a great energy and back and forth to it that just like completely, to your point, contrasts the smooth, steady, quiet like murder attempt, like murder. It's so good.
Is this the only time in the whole film we get, like, I'm trying to wrap my brains, like, is this the only time we get, like, a steady cam in the whole thing? I feel like the rest of the film is so clinically shot, so, like,
it's mostly locked off. There's a handful of, and I don't know that this is even steady cam. I think this looks, when he gets out of the car and walks towards the cab, like, that looks handheld to me. I don't even know that's there. The only time the camera seems to move in this movie is either, like, slow zooms, like the one from the top of the building looking down at the cab, sort of like slowly pulling out, or there's big wide shots of the helicopter shots over the San Francisco Bay, or there's not a ton of movement. Like the wide shots move a little bit, like there might be a crane or two somewhere, but subtly. Like that's not the point of the movie. No. A lot of it is tripods, as far as I can tell.
Yeah,
we've talked about how the murders all happen, decently early, like first half hour of the movie or so, and then it becomes all about the investigation and about the process of it starts to get more important and looping in all the different cities, we'll talk about those montages in a second, I bet. But when the energy of these murders comes back, is really fascinating. I love that he brings the way that they shoot the murders comes back when leading up to the basement sequence, because I think we could loop in the basement sequence with the murder sequence because it's the same vibe, it's the same feel.
And the other attempted murder, right, with the woman with her baby in the car.
Yeah, that's creepy as hell. That
attempted murder comes at like the exact hour mark, like to the minute.
There's one shot when he meets the guy in front of the movie theater before he goes to the house that looks exactly like all the rest of the scene, like the way that we're looking through car windows, and it's very intentionally, like, no, why don't you, he's talking him into doing something that he knows he's not super comfortable with, but he's gonna go along with it because I don't want to be rude, like, I don't know if you guys are My Favorite Murder listeners at all. My wife is a huge fan of that podcast. But they've got a saying that they just politeness because so many people get killed because they're just too polite to like say like, hey, I'm gonna leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's almost that floaty camera quality we're getting from these scenes. It's almost like brought back. Like, and we'll definitely touch this scene. Like, I mean, there's too many scenes, but the Arthur Lee Allen like interview interrogation scene, like almost when he enters and exits the room, he brings back that exact same like. It's almost like a visual like motif of like
Yeah.
I think this guy is the Zodiac because I've moved the camera the way I have in the murder scenes almost.
If you're not being put in the perspective of a victim or a potential victim in the basement sequence case, like you're being put, like when he enters the room for the interrogation, you know, we're immediately interrogating him also. You know, like there's a heightened attentiveness in this scene that I actually read. They did something to the texture, to the quality of the image, and like they boosted the vividness and like they
sharpened it. They artificially sharpened it.
Yeah, they sharpened the thing to make us sort of like caveman brain kind of be aware at a heightened level all of a sudden, which it was in the American Cinematographer article. I'm telling you, it's a good article about how the DP saw it after Fincher had done the coloring on it, and he was like, "What did you just do to this scene?" Like he couldn't even quite put his finger on what had happened.
I love that. I mean, we're on this scene now, so I'll talk about it a bit. But
we're talking about the scene. Yeah, this is the scene where they finally find themselves on the case of Arthur Lee Miller, and they go track him down at his job in the factory.
It's almost the closest we do get. Obviously, the murder scenes, but you'd never call them like action scenes. This is almost, I think, the closest you get to an action scene in this film. And I think Fincher's so good at that, of like turning dialogue into combat. Like the opening of Social Network is probably the most famous example of that. Is basically like dialogue warfare for 10 minutes, and it's like you get that here, like just the arrogance and like the performance here from John Carroll Lynch. I think is just incredible. Like you almost believe he is the killer. Like he just kind of disappears into it. Like he's kind of normal looking, but creepy. Like the arrogance and like when they just cut to the POV of him looking at each of them and like sizing them up essentially. And basically, I think it's him saying like, I've got the measure of all of you. And like, I think his next lines are like, if I was the Zodiac, I certainly wouldn't tell you. Like he thinks he's basically better than these people.
That's like that. Yeah. That's the last line of the scene, which is excellent. And what else this movie does too is like how it builds up to it, right? Like it makes sure to give you close-ups of the clues. Like the second he sits down, he like crosses his legs. It's a close-up of the boot, and that boot is the clue that like the I think it's the Vallejo guy. Like that was like the one
boot print.
Yeah, like the boot print. So it's like he's got the boots, then they got the watch, and it's just like it's this scene that very clearly communicates it. And to your point, like the performance of what's his name again?
John Carroll Lynch.
John Carroll Lynch.
Yeah, like the performance of John Carroll Lynch in this scene and like that arrogance is incredible. And what's awesome about it too is how it's contrasted later in the movie when Jake Gyllenhaal goes to the when he goes to the hardware store, and that confidence is just kind of missing there, because like that's the one where it's kind of like deer in the headlight, like deer in the headlights, because it's just like they don't say anything to each other. They're just like he's just like, can I help you? And he's like, no, I'm good. But they, like talking about like an act off of they're just like sitting there staring at each other and they're communicating, just literally looking at each other, that they know who each other is.
In this scene, like you've got the Zodiac famously like called the police pigs. He had no respect for the police, didn't like him, and that's kind of what you're getting from this character here. And right at the end, you kind of almost get a knowing look and respect from Arthur Leon towards Gray Smith. It's almost like at this point, I can't remember I don't think the book is out, but like almost like looking at him going like, you're not a police, but I kind of there's almost a respect there without knowing who he is. And I feel like, I mean, we'll get onto the last scene later, but yeah, isn't it also an incredible scene? But
the other thing about this scene too is, and when talking about like sort of showing off the clues, we don't get that anywhere else in the movie. Like it is like we don't get reaction shots. The shot of like Ruffalo looks down and then we cut to what he's looking at. Like we don't get that anywhere. And that's not what this movie does, but they do it in this scene. And they also do direct address in this scene, just all of a sudden and it's a moment in the middle. It just happens in the middle of the scene because there's a chunk of this conversation where everybody, it feels like everybody is seeing exactly through everybody else. Like they have to do the dance and they're talking to each other in these sort of, like half-coded, like, I mean, this is practically a confession you know, which is an interesting part of the scene. But when they start cutting to direct address and you know, everybody's looking at us, the audience, you know, as they're sort of seeing each other for who they really are. And it's just that middle chunk of a scene for just this one important part where they're talking, where everybody realizes, you know, well, this guy's a killer. Is what that's saying, which is, and it's the only time in the movie we get that.
I'm not the Zodiac. And if I was, I certainly wouldn't tell you.
There's a line in the American cinematographer interview that that we will be continuing to reference, and
we're just gonna link to it
as we start to like slowly transition our conversation away from like the action scenes and more to like the meat and potatoes of the movie, which is, you know, mostly the investigation stuff. And the DP said, he's like, I love the Zodiac script, but I was concerned about the amount of non-cinematic information that had to be conveyed on screen. There was so much exposition, just people talking on the phone or having conversations. It was difficult to imagine how it could be done in a visual way. And I thought about that for a second, and then I thought about how that is just like quintessential Fincher, because I remember when The Killer came out, and that is a mediocre to good David Fincher movie. Like it's not bad is not giving it justice. It's pretty good, but like I fundamentally think that movie script is probably the least generous script I've ever seen a director take on, because like this guy, like Savadis is talking about Savitas is talking about conversations on a phone and like, you know, just like reading documents. Like The Killer is mostly sitting around waiting for 20 seconds of an opportunity to murder somebody. And like that is done so well. Like that opening scene in The Killer is like literally him waiting in an abandoned WeWork for hours, like doing push-ups and listening to music before he can take a shot. And it's just like, it's incredible, like the talent of David Fincher in order to make all of these scenes like work and keep you interested and like involved. And to what I was saying earlier, it's like the second half of this movie is the thing that I'm like most fascinated by, because it is all the investigation stuff. Like all what would be the traditional boring exposition is so exquisitely done that I was just like in the entire time.
Yeah, and I flagged that quote too, and the end of it is, I told David we had to figure out ways to make these scenes interesting and cinematic, but our solution was the opposite, to simply have faith in the material and present it truthfully. Which is wild to me to think that the visuals in this movie are simple, you know? Like, because it takes so much work to make things look effortless. And that's, I think with cinematography, with the editing as well, Angus Wall, the editor, he's worked with Fincher a ton. The restraint in spots and the flash in other spots where you have it with this. Let's talk about the montages real quick. Let's transition into talking about the investigation stuff, because there's a lot of, there are what, 3 or 4 cross-cut kind of montages of investigations happening. There's the one in the beginning where all of the people are, well, there's one where the letter is actually arriving to,
that's one of my favorites.
It's just
I love that so
tracking
much.
the ladder.
Tracking the letter, showing
cross-cutting
up to the editorial desk.
And it kind of just
it's
immediately makes me think of, and I think maybe it's just because it's a newsroom, but it just makes you think of all the President's Men, which must have obviously been an inspiration for this film. And even like a little Easter egg with like one of his cartoons is of Nixon, and you're just like, I like to think that's a little nod. But yeah,
the way the newsroom looks, it looks just with the pillars in the middle of the,
and just the
big
yellow
round pillars
everywhere
in the
as
middle
well.
of the room, and the, but again, that's like, that speaks to that thing about like our language that we're all fluent in of what movies are supposed to look like when they're set in the 60s or 70s. Like that was a big part of the look of this film. But yeah, I mean this sequence that just takes like every step of the way and everything that it took just to make the newsroom aware that there was a murderer out there, and like following that process. There's also the one where everybody starts trying to decode it, and it's like, here they are in Langley doing it, here they are in Sacramento, here's the FBI office, and then here's the history teacher and his wife over breakfast trying to solve it, and like those type, and the way that, you know, there's sort of a script that stretches across all of those scenes. It's split up between those different spots. They do it again when Toschi and Armstrong are trying to talk their way through it, and also Avery and Graysmith are trying to do it as well, kind of separately. And then to me, it also, there's the scene where Armstrong, where Anthony Edwards' character is trying to get all the different townships, all the different law enforcement people on the same page, and it's Elias Koteas and Donal Logue, also two more of the like, oh yeah, that guy, you know, all stars in this movie. Oh, you got to talk to so and so, and he goes talk to him. Well, yeah, no, did you talk to so and so? And then Anthony Edwards is just in the middle of it, like, so like, you know. The thing that I find most fascinating about the investigation part of this is how hopeless the bureaucracy of it is, how impossible a task it was to even start to think about solving this case. And the way that's portrayed in those montages, I think is great. And that's an Angus Wall thing, I think. Like, it's really solid editing.
The way they conveyed this investigation as just being a mess from the get-go really is just amazing. It kind of like builds to a point, like the first real like public like display of this, I guess, is like the TV voting with Brian Cox as Melvin Belli, and it's just like, it's kind of just haphazard. Like, you can, I don't know if you did this, you can watch the real life version of this on YouTube, of this voting, and it's uncanny how well they recaptured it. And you know, it's hard these days to maybe see Brian Cox and not just expect him to shout expletives at you, but sure. he is so good in this role. And yeah, it's just a mess. Like this, like not like the actual scene itself is beautifully and clinically made, but like you just get this real sense that everyone watching is just despairing, just like, what are we doing? Like, do we really think he's just going to phone in and tell us where he is and who he is? Like, it's mind blowing to think that, and it is something that really happened. Like, it is just.
I also just love the limitations of everything. Like, God, can you like? Just that, like, it's crazy to me that they actually were able to solve crimes without DNA. Because like now when we like look at like crime fiction, right? Like DNA is such a huge part of every investigation.
Or just technology,
like,
right?
Yeah. And this was like totally off the table. And they're like, hey, we need you to keep him on the phone for 15 minutes so we can trace this thing. Like in spy movies, it's like 45 seconds. We need him for 45 seconds. And it's just like 15 minutes. Like that's longer than like a call to my mother. and things
like the way it's just on TV, right? Like there's so much of this film is just seeing or hearing about the Zodiac via TV screens everywhere, or the radio being on it. You get the real feeling that it's just like a specter, like over the city over this time. It is ingenious, and it's like there's even a line I think later on Anthony Edwards says, like, you know how I know it's real? I saw it on TV. And it's just like almost Fincher, like, it is basically Fincher reliving his childhood, right, in this area, and like seeing it everywhere. And he's almost retelling, like, that's why it's dreamlike at times. I think it's like almost like it's obviously ridiculously researched, and he did basically his own investigation into the case, but almost mixed with his childhood. Like, you get the child on the sofa watching this with Graysmith, and like it's almost like him watching it, I think. Is what I like to think anyway. I've not spoken to David Fincher. Maybe one day.
We'll get him on My Best Shots one of these days.
Oh,
to your point about the video aspect of it, the TV nature of it is one of the reasons why they actually decided to shoot in video. To bring it back to the ASC article, again, there's a great quote. It's like, the slight video effect is more synonymous with the nightly news than the 35 millimeter anamorphic lenses. So like that is a visual style that they were deliberately trying to evoke with like the capture tech.
Can we talk about David Fincher and lenses real quick?
Go for it. Indulge yourself.
The glass in this movie is remarkable, and you can tell it in there's a few moments of really long rack focuses that don't change the shape of the image, and those are lenses that don't breathe. That is like the best looking glass. There's one shot in particular that I saw, and I was just like. Like, I don't know why I noticed. I'm so fascinated by this. Every time I see anything like this, I just it pops in my head. But the it's the first time that we're in the bullpen in the detectives in the SFPD, and it's Dermot Mulroney is talking to Mark Ruffalo, and Ruffalo says, "Oh yeah, Anthony Edwards is over there," and we cut to Anthony Edwards on the phone across the room, and there's this gorgeous rack focus that doesn't change the shape of the frame at all. It doesn't change the image even a little bit. You know, there's a lot of, like, sometimes it warbles and all that stuff, but anyway, I just there's another couple of moments where we'll rack focus back to somebody else, and it's just so buttery smooth. Keep an eye out for rack focuses, guys. That's all I'm asking.
I know the exact shot you're talking about as well.
Yeah,
but they kind of pulled him on the phone. Is like I think Ruffalo almost like points to him, and you follow his like the focus basically follows his finger. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's an amazing shot because Dermot Mulroney looks. And then also Anthony Edwards is on the other end of it to kind of catch that look and turn back to camera a little bit too. It's like, it's such textbook simple staging, but it's stuff that you can't look past that stuff. Like, that's the kind of thing that makes a movie like this so tight and so lasting. And it's all of that basic stuff that, it's foundationally so important to making a good movie.
Yeah. Well, it makes
Love to see it.
A movie and not a TV show, if we're being harsh, really. I mean, like, these days, this would probably be an 8-part Netflix show, wouldn't it? And we can talk about how
it'd be called Mindhunter.
Exactly, yeah. Like, we wouldn't have Mindhunter without Zodiac, and we'll never probably finish Mindhunter. But yeah, it's, obviously Fincher also put care into his TV shows, but there's a lot of TV shows that don't put that level of care into it. But
I bet he has the same set of primes that he uses on Mindhunter also.
Should we go to the basement scene? It's like the...
Yeah, we touched on it earlier, but we didn't adequately cover the basement scene. The basement scene is one hell of a scene.
It's maybe the most memorable scene from the whole film.
I think so.
There's like elements of horror through the film, but this is just a full-on horror scene. Like, although like, in reality, nothing's going to happen in this basement, it still manages to convince you, this guy you've never met before in your life, maybe he's the Zodiac. It's like, could it be him? And it's just it's just also just the beauty of casting, like we've mentioned before. Like, it's just a creepy guy, Charles Fleischer, who I didn't find out until I did research this, was the voice of Roger Rabbit. So
wait, what? That guy?
Wait, that guy's the voice?
Yeah, he's the voice of Roger Rabbit.
It's that Charles Fleischer?
Yeah.
Wow.
So there you go.
I love that so much. Thank you for that.
It's just a textbook horror scene, really. Although nothing ultimately is going to bad happen, and it's like that thing we said earlier of like a horror scene. You just tell him, drive, get out of here. He does eventually do it. They even do the little, the door's locked, I can't get out thing that 150 films have done before. But it's it doesn't seem cliched. When Fincher does it, it works, if you know what I mean.
Well, the added layer for this one that he does that I noticed this when I was rewatching this time is that the first time Roger Rabbit pops up into frame, like, it's his reflection, and the way that it's framed, it almost looks like he's in an adjacent hallway, right? Like, it looks like he's. But then when Gyllenhaal jumps and turns around, and we spin around, he's like right there. So it's like, we see him sneak up, but he kind of feels like he's in a different space. And then when we spin around to the close-up, he's on top of us, And so, like, there is that sort of, he sort of deked us with that first time that we see him. So he's still able to make it sneak up on us, which is incredible.
It's such an impactful scene, like you said, but I can't get, like, is it all meant to be a red herring?
You know what this scene reminds me of? It's just like it's one scene. I think it works so well because it's just like fundamentally at its core a retelling of like The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe, which is just like a scene, like a short story where like this like one guy decides that he wants to murder this other guy. So what he tries to do is like get him drunk and like lure him into his basement and get him so drunk where he just like kind of collapses and then builds a wall, and then like this guy just dies in the basement. And this works on that same premise of just like, you get them down in the basement and you just kind of bring them further and further and further along down like the corridor. And then what's great about this and like why the scene works so well and the tension builds is because, to everything we've talking about, he's impolite. He's just like, you know what? No, actually, I gotta go. And then like runs upstairs and gets the out of there. Also, other touch point of something that people don't like, you don't really talk about. who has a key locking door on the inside? Right? It's creepy because it's not like it's a bolt, right? But it's not like you just turn the bolt and run out. It's he had to wait for him to come unlock the door with the key from the inside before he can go out. And it's like shit like that. That's like a really, really, really nice touch.
Yeah. And it's like just the payoff of like the seemingly insignificant line early on of just like there's not many basements in California. It's just like that it all builds right to make you think, oh, maybe we are getting somewhere here.
And the handwriting shit. Is the handwriting shit just bullshit, right? Because it's just like one of the key things in this is just like, well, he didn't write the posters. I did. And it's all based and like plays into like the Philip Baker Hall character of like, is this guy full of shit? Because the whole time we're speaking of like red herrings, like we're chasing the red herrings is like, is he ambidextrous? Because he writes his K's differently with his right hand than his like left hand. And it's just like, this guy's authority that's saying that Arthur Lee Allen isn't the killer because the handwriting is off. And then here's a wholly separate guy where the handwriting just like kind of matches, you know? Because that's the key to this.
It's fascinating too because like we don't, Cardy, you mentioned that like we know nothing's going to happen. Because it's like it's Jake Gyllenhaal and he's playing the guy that wrote the book that this is based on. So, like if you pull on that thread, you know that he's not going to die in this scene. But the way that it's treated visually and narratively the same way that the murders have happened, maybe the brilliant part about this is like, well, I don't know, maybe we don't. Like it's shot and cut and the feel of it, the tone, everything, the pace of it is all exactly in line with the murders that we haven't seen at this point in an hour and 15 minutes, something like that. But as soon as it starts to happen again, the hair on the back of your neck kind of stands up a little bit, same as Jake Gyllenhaal. And then here we're sitting here watching him do the same thing that the other victims do, where they just sort of like kind of passively go along with some of this stuff, and it's so fascinating because you're sitting there saying, "Don't, man, like, don't go down there."
He's so obsessed, right? It's
so
basically a film about
obsessed,
obsession. That is what it turns. It's just the descent of all these characters into obsession. Like the Zodiac just kind of fades into, like I said, after the first hour. Aside from the interrogation scene, if you believe Arthur Lee Allen's Zodiac's not really in the film for the second hour and a half. It's not about him anymore. It is about these people. Essentially, he is ruining lives without existing anymore, which is just very interesting, I think.
Yeah, the Zodiac-shaped crater that got left in some of these lives is pretty heavy in the back half of the movie. But it's also scenes like this that. The other point of the movie is that we just don't know, and that these leads and this evidence and everything is unreliable, that like you can look at it and be like, ooh, this is the guy. But, he's also not the guy because we know this other guy's the guy. Or do we? And like the way that the movie presents any potential sort of new revelation as, oh, here's the guy and here's how terrifying it is to be in his basement, it's incredible. Like the way that it leans into, we just don't know, it could be any one of these people. I think is awesome.
Yeah. I had 2 more scenes on my list, which are basically the last 2 scenes of the film minus the epilogue. So before the epilogue, it's where Graysmith basically wakes up Ruffalo and is presenting his case to him, and the whole like the most convincing fact in the whole thing, right? And I think there is actually a follow-up Netflix documentary that came out a few months that follows up on the Arthur Lee Allen thread of all of the fact that like he lived like 50 yards away from one of the victims and knew them. And when Gyllenhaal says I walked it, that's like the spine tingling. It's almost like the I've solved it moment, despite you haven't really solved it.
Well, it proves that he's so dedicated that like Tashi's gonna take him seriously. It's like, no, I walked it. Yeah,
exactly. And you can see he believes him, right? Like, and he goes, just because you can't prove it doesn't mean it isn't true. And I think yeah, Toshi then replies, yeah, easy dirty Harry. It's like, I feel that seems almost like Fincher having a conversation with himself. He's like, I think I've got it, but I don't want to say 100% sure it is that, so I'm going to ease off a little bit here. It's like, I don't know. I love that scene.
It's another thing that wraps up the sort of process thread of this movie, because process is everywhere in this movie. Even there's a little throwaway scene where Anthony Edwards calls Mark Ruffalo at one point, just as Mark Ruffalo's wife is like, hey, come to bed. And he's like, well, I got to make one more phone call real quick. And then we follow her, like, walk around a corner, set something down, walk up the stairs, go into the bedroom, close the door. And, like, why did we need to see that? Like, the process of her leaving his space was important to that scene, because it sets him alone. It sets, like, here, this is his work is literally coming between, it's causing her to close a door, in between them. But they do it so deliberately, and it's so consciously in the middle of a scene that is otherwise decently unimportant. I think it sets up the basement thing. Is that's the same scene where he's like, not many people have basements.
No, and then like straight after we get Graysmith going to the store. So it's almost that, like, I need to know for myself, right? I need to look in his eyes, and that is the full on, like, memories of a murder almost. I don't want to say homage, but like, it's essentially a very similar, and it's like, I'm gonna look straight at you and work this out. And it's that whole thing of, like, as long as he can't prove it, but he thinks he knows, right?
And that sort of wraps up the process side of this movie too, right? It's like, there is a process that we go about trying to solve these murders, and we just can't. Even if it's the truth, can't prove it.
Absolutely.
Easy there, Dirty Harry. It's a good line. But yeah, this moment where they because this is what Jake Gyllenhaal said to his wife earlier in the movie. I just need to stand there and look at him and know. And so he gets his moment, and he gets his closure, and he looks at him and knows, and then
like the
Arthur
slightest
looks back
little
at
nod,
him.
like
Yeah. But to watch Arthur Lee Allen look back at him and know that he knows, it's great. It's just a quiet little moment for a movie as violent and bloody as this one is in moments. For it to end so quietly is really something else.
And then you get this epilogue. The process ends right, but then almost like Fincher can't help but do. Oh, it's almost like a Columbo, like one more, like one more thing. Right? It's like,
one more thing.
By the way, even later, I'm pretty convinced.
My wife, she's into true crime, but
By the way, also another murderer's row, pun intended, of like that guy.
The movie's got one more. Oh yeah, that guy. Left up
that
its sleeve.
Yeah.
It's really good cast as well, because he genuinely does look like an older version of the kid they cast right at the start of the film.
It's a 2-hour, 40-minute movie that is wall-to-wall brilliant moments. Is there anything else we need to talk about before we move on?
One quick dumb thing I noticed that I just like peak Fincher too, which is just hilarious. Montages he uses to signify the passing of time. Like there's a quick montage in there where we just watched the like Trans-American Pyramid building being built, and it's just like instead of doing anything like as simple as like a year, like 2 years later, like something like that, because like I actually went and looked up how long it took to build that building, and that building was built between 1969 and was completed in 1972. So he just like spent all of this money on a CGI on a CGI time lapse of this building being built in order to just be like, a year has passed, like a year and a half has passed. It's incredible.
There's also the audio only montage that's just black screen after the Dirty Harry screening, which I don't know if that's in the theatrical cut or if it's because I watched the director's. I only watched the director's cut of this film, but I don't know if it's only in the director's cut or if it's an extended version in the director's cut or not. But
it was in the version that I watched.
Okay, cool. I know it's at least extended, if not completely new in the director's cut, but it is literally just like news reports and music playing to signal the passing of time. But I was lucky enough, like 6-7 years ago, I went to a talk that David Fincher did at the BFI here in London, and he actually talked about this film, and he talked about saying this is pretty much one of, if not his favorite scenes in the whole film, because I think it mainly because of the battle. Like he fought with the producers because they wanted to cut it way down, but then when it came out on DVD or for the director's cut, he extended it way longer again, just because he wanted the audience to imagine those years in between and what images conjure in your mind. Like, but I think like he didn't say it, but it's almost like I always wondered, why do you keep a black screen? I don't know if that's because he didn't want anything to appear on screen that wasn't related to the Zodiac. It's like, I don't want you to be distracted visually by anything that doesn't relate to this case. Like, I need to tell you, like, 4 years have passed, but I'm not going to show you anything of those 4 years. Like, as far as you're concerned, the Zodiac never went away, is kind of what that signifies, I think.
Well, and I think, too, there's something about it for me that was like, you know, it's a good way to show that people are kind of moving on, that they're just, there's nothing to show.
Yeah.
Where the story of the Zodiac is concerned, like, you know, and also everything that we know about the Zodiac to date amounts to nothing. You know, like, it's not like, I feel like we could have easily put a shot of Tashi at a desk, like, you know, stressing about something, or like, or showing somebody actually moving on. Like, we could have seen Jake Gyllenhaal have his baby. You know, like that sort of time, or another building being built and down. Like, we could have shown any of that, but like the idea that there's just nothing is such an interesting choice. And yeah, I mean, for him to say, like, imagining those years passing and hearing other serial killers be talked about and other songs that were on the radio, and the signal to noise ratio kind of blends, and, you know, it makes it impossible to track. Like, to me, it's another thing that makes the Zodiac, you know, so scary and unknowable, is that even in the years where he wasn't around, it's like there's all this other stuff that's happening and we just kind of forget.
Yeah. I think that's all my favorite scenes. I mean, it's about a third of the film, but, you know.
We today have concluded an agreement to end the war and bring peace with honor in Vietnam.
Charles Manson for the Tate LaBianca mass murder,
Pleaded guilty in the Chowchilla kidnapping
the murder trial of Juan Corrado with the slain.
Chairman Mao died today. He was
An absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
All right, let's talk about movie lists. So, like I say, over the years, you know, we've mentioned it a handful of times. The basement scene was on our list of 7 scariest movie moments. I'm not sure why we only did 7. I need to look. I need to fix that. It got an honorable mention just recently in the top 10 mysteries, movie mysteries.
He didn't make that.
Got
an
honorable mention in the.
these,
Okay, I'll loop you into the next one. But the category of the total stressful package, which oddly enough ended up going to The Invitation. Which I don't know if you've seen The Invitation.
Yeah,
it's
I
one
have.
of my favorite movies.
Does that
But
have
that's
John
another
Carroll
movie
Lynch
about.
as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's got John Carroll Lynch, and also it's another movie that is, at least in part, about like being too polite to get out of a situation. It's like all these old friends get together, and like the feeling that I'm always left with after watching that movie is like, would I have left? Like, I don't know that I would have left. And like,
I'm terrible at leaving. Yeah.
Yeah,
I would have been sat there.
It has to have, Zodiac has to have been mentioned somewhere else here and there over the years, but nowhere major. It's not been a huge part of the channel, which, you know, feels like a mistake now. Yeah. So let me just apologize to you, Cardy.
That's fine. I have some list suggestions that it could have.
Yes.
It could make it on. Best Mark Ruffalo looking anguished at crime films, as I mentioned earlier. We've got at least 3 of those. There's probably more.
There's at least 3 of those.
Secretly the best films from master directors is one.
That's
I would
interesting.
Say.
That's a good one.
That's good. Yeah. Sneak up masterpieces, kind of. Yeah. That's a fun topic.
Yeah, movies that convince you their conspiracy theory is the truth. Bit long-winded, but you know, there's a couple of those. And the last one would be, it's more TV. It's more TV shows that wouldn't exist without these movies. So Mindhunter wouldn't exist without this. The Sopranos wouldn't exist without Goodfellas. Then at least not as it is. So, you know, I'm sure there's more examples of that.
Right. The other side of that coin, you can find a few examples of that, and then flip to the other side of the coin of just like movies that would have been TV shows right now.
Absolutely. This definitely
like
would have
if
been.
you're trying to make Zodiac right now, it would have been 8 episodes on Apple TV probably. If we're lucky, they make the best stuff.
Yeah, I did actually make a little note for your lump bump section as well, but I don't know if we're not doing that.
Oh yeah, go ahead. The lamp bumps. We don't do lamp bumps for every movie, but it's a choice. The idea that bumping the lamp is making something harder, but doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is just, I think David Fincher being a bit mad, but apparently hair was digitally added to all the close-ups of Jake Gyllenhaal's knuckles because he thought his hands were too hairless and pretty. So every time he holds a letter, he was like, I need to make those look a bit rougher. They look too nice.
Do we have any other? I mean, there's the obvious. We haven't done like true crime as a movie list. There's some like, I think we talked about it earlier, like that nebulous space between fiction and historical fiction and nonfiction and not documentary, but kind of very beholden to the truth movies. There's a more articulate way to say that could
maybe
make
like
for an
best
interesting
horror
list.
scenes in non-horror films, something like that.
Yeah,
this is borderline a horror
think
film anyway, but you know.
Well, that's what makes it work for that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best part about doing Top 100 is reverse engineering movie lists. So
that's what it's all for.
Just so
really,
we can talk more about
it's
Zodiac.
workshopping.
Yeah, exactly. All right, who's your MVP for the movie?
It's got to be the Zodiac, isn't it? He got away with it. There is no film without him. He got what he wanted.
Correct.
He's now infamous forever. I mean,
I guess we haven't. That hasn't come up much on the show. Like,
No.
what are we? Movies that are based on real events. Do those real people get a chance to be MVP?
well, the famous one is Memories of a Murder. The guy did get caught later. You know, that film, not to spoil it, ends on a cliffhanger, but that case was later solved. Like, there is still, you know, he'd be what, at least 80 now, but there is still a chance.
Well,
the
it's Ted
Zodiac,
Cruz, right?
the real Zodiac, is alive and has watched this film.
He's serving in Congress or in the Senate right now.
Yeah,
Yeah. We've elected.
that's
him
one
to
of the,
Congress.
that's one of the best.
Yeah,
That's one of the
Foreign
best bits of
affairs.
trolling I've ever seen. The Ted Cruz is the Zodiac killer is
He
one of the
repre-
finest bits of
It's not been disproved.
trolling.
No,
No, show me a picture of them in the same room.
But no, seriously, it has to be Fincher, doesn't it? This is his
It's got to
film.
be. This one's easy. I mean, I think for me, the DP and the editor, you know, Harris Savitas and Angus Wall would be they'd be close seconds.
Yeah, this movie's all vision.
Yeah, but I think it's all and also reading some of the behind the scenes stuff about like Fincher was even responsible for the digital workflow. Like he was in there, like again to the point of him working with this camera very pointedly to prepare for this movie. Like he was in there working out like how the DIT was managing the footage and stuff like he was doing all of it. So it's Cal, to your point, this one's about the vision, I think.
Yeah.
But everybody's great. It's one of those movies like I don't know that I argue with many other choices because everybody's at the top of their game, but it's one of those things where it kind of defaults back to the director. It's like, well, if he had everybody working really well, then
Absolutely. Like I said before, I think it's his masterpiece and probably his most. If you take Mank out the equation, which I probably would do, it's probably his most personal film. So, yeah,
that's
adore
what it seems like too. I mean, growing up around it and being fascinated with it, in real life. Well, before we get to where this movie ranks, Cal, I think we got time for one more segment.
As the segment we usually do here, if Nicolas Cage was in this movie, who would he be?
I mean, the serious answer is probably he could play the Downey role. Downey is perfect though.
Oh, I think I'd put him. I would put him in Tashi.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, like Bad Lieutenant Cage.
First off, he's got hairy knuckles.
that's-
He's got hairy knuckles, so they're saving money on post, right?
Yeah.
So, he could go off the chain. He could play a crazy detective. The one thing that we haven't actually objectively said was apparently that Tashi was the legitimate cop who inspired both Bullet and Dirty Harry. So those jokes are being made because he's the guy. And
it's what inspired the George Lucas to name it the Toshi Station.
I just learned that this
Star Wars.
time around.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm trying to say is, if
Famous place to pick up some power converters, Tashi Station.
Yeah. If you're looking for a boisterous Italian to play an outspoken cop, you could do worse than Nicolas Cage. But
I'd also I'd quite like him
I
as
would be
the
interested to
call-in guy on the TV show, just calling in, just his voice. That'd be quite funny.
Yeah, that'd be a fun little Easter egg. I wouldn't mind seeing him as Armstrong, as Anthony Edwards' character. I wouldn't mind seeing him go the other way of just that, you know, the guy that sort of gets beat up by the process and you know, ends up knowing when to walk away. Like, that's not a thing that we ever see out of Nicolas Cage, and I wouldn't be opposed to seeing that. It's also a place. That's also a place in the movie I think you can put him where it certainly doesn't get worse. I think with Ruffalo and Downey, you run the risk of
a gamble.
Cage being in. It's a gamble because 2007 was what, the second National Treasure movie, that era of you know, Ghost Rider era of Nicolas Cage, I think. So like putting him in that Anthony Edwards role as kind of like a mild mannered type of guy.
But
like, I like that.
We're also only 2 years away from Port of Call, which, in my humble opinion, may be one of the best Nicolas Cage performances of all time.
Wow. It's a bold. I was going to say maybe he could be in the basement. He could be the basement man. Maybe Pig Nicolas Cage in the basement. That would work.
Pigs Nicolas Cage in the basement.
Yeah.
I think the pig Nicolas Cage is who you'd probably be looking for the Anthony Edwards role.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit older.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think, you know, as much as I hate to lose Goose, I don't think Goose added.
He goosed.
Is Anthony Edwards the best
to the proceedings?
Film wingman? He's great in this one.
Yeah, he goosed it.
He goosed it. He goosed it. And maybe that's exactly what he needed to do. And putting Nicolas Cage there draws too much attention to that particular character. That's not a man that shares his animal crackers.
I would not be surprised at all if someone was like, all right, well, we need to get a Goose for Ruffalo. And then somebody else was like, well, what's Goose doing? Get him in here.
You're saying we could get Goose for this?
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about where this movie ranks. I didn't have it. Cal, did you have it on your list? I'm told Dan has it at Dan had it at number 32.
Congratulations, Cardy. You're in bad company.
Sorry, yeah. Where do you have it?
It's my 9th favorite film.
Number 9.
Yeah,
top
10.
I
absolutely love it. It's
okay.
Yeah, like I said, just brings
just knowing the thing about Jake Gyllenhaal's knuckles proves that you love the movie.
Like I said, it's a comfort film for me. It's Fincher's favorite. But I have really weird comfort films. Like if I want to relax, not necessarily. I like something really long, fast cut. A lot of people talking. I'll put something like Boogie Nights on. I'll put Babylon on. I loved Babylon. I'll just put on something absolutely just almost coked up to relax to. I'm sober myself,
off.
but you know.
Yeah. You take the shoes off. You put your feet up. Pour some whiskey. Put Babylon on to unwind
and just watch an elephant do diarrhea everywhere. It's a great night. I'd recommend it to everyone.
Okay, great. That's probably what you're gonna do later on, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna watch Zodiac again tonight. Actually, yeah.
So Dan had it 32. None of the rest of us had it, and Cardy's picks don't count. So,
well, luckily,
you got an envelope there, Cal?
I got this right here. So why don't we pop this?
I bet I can guess it spot on.
Oh yeah. I'm not gonna let you do that. So It is 122.
122. Out of the top 100. Not egregiously so. That's not so bad.
It's fine. You know,
It's
in the
fine.
history
I
of
suppose
film,
if
I'll
one of-
take it. You know.
Okay. There might be 121 better movies than.
Where in reality, there's 8.
There's only 8. Well, hey man, thank you for joining us on our fun little in between season episodes. That was fun, man. I appreciate it.
I had a great time. I've been wanting to just talk film. I don't get to just talk about one film for 2 hours often, you know. So it's good to be
back. I've missed this.
Yeah, to be honest, I almost forgot how to prep for this thing. So I'm glad to be getting back in the swing of it. But yeah, Cardy, thank you so much for being here. Also, thank you to Vallejo Police Sergeant, producer Tayo Oyekan, a math teacher and his wife who are great at puzzles, technical producers Amir, Rakib, and Marhyan Franzen, and the mystery as to who Dan really is will go unsolved and unthanked for yet another week. He's going to send me a very creepy letter soon. I can just feel it. But we will be back again for another mid-season episode with just an absolute champion of our behind-the-scenes lives, Tanner Smith. who, in addition to being just hilariously wrong about Hitchcock movies, also apparently loves Eyes Wide Shut. So that's what we're going to be watching next week.
Oh, I mean, it is very fun.
Yeah, listen, Zodiac and Eyes Wide Shut is quite the double feature. But that's what we'll be back with next time. So between now and then, stay safe, be good, and we will see you next time.